Paul Gitsham and Malk to discuss Paul's latest book, A Price to Pay, and how it was made into an audiobook by Malk from his home.
Hello, everybody.
If you could tell us a bit about the plot, please, Paul.
Okay. So, A Price to Pay is the sixth full-length novel within the D.C.I. Warren Jones series, and basically, it opens with a woman running through a forest in the dark. We don't know what's going on. There's dogs chasing her. We have no idea why that is happening to her. Then chapter 1 starts with the body of a local ne'er-do-well found in a massage parlor where he's been brutally stabbed. And so the question is why was he stabbed and who stabbed him? Now, it seems like an open and shut case. There were two masseuses there who were witnesses, and it happened in broad daylight. But of course, it soon becomes apparent that it's not open and shut. The masseuses are Serbian; they don't speak very good English, and it turns out that the deceased is from a prominent local crime family. He had a penchant for chasing other men's wives, and his family have been hiding an awful lot of his ill deeds.
So going into the audiobook now, what was it like doing the Serbian accent?
The accents were interesting with that. I mean, to be honest, unless you're doing lots of different Eastern European countries, there is a sort of generic Eastern European accent that there's almost nobody no Anglophone can really tell the difference between them. I mean, I have done books before about, specifically based in places like former Yugoslavia, or the testimonies of people who were in concentration camps, and they were from all over, Poland, Germany, wherever else. And so you've got to be a bit more careful. In this case, it was the sort of generic Eastern European accent. The ones that I found most interesting in this one, there were a few characters who were Northerners, a couple of Mancunians who are quite key to the plot, and one that you find out a little later on was originally from Yorkshire. So when I read the book before I start doing it, and you've got to pick the voices that you're going to use and work out whether they're going to work, and if there's anything late on in the book that means you have to modify your choice, or as in the case of Detective Sergeant Richardson in book 5, we'll possibly come to that later.
Hutchins, yeah.
But yeah, just trying to work out exactly how to pitch it is it's one of the things I really enjoy. I like accents. I like finding character voices.
Yeah.
Should I put an apology on record, Hutchinson?
Yeah. Say again?
Shall I put an apology on record for Hutchinson for him?
Oh, Hutchinson, that's who it was. It wasn't.
So, for those you're not familiar with this series, there's a character called DS David Hutchinson, and he's actually based on a work colleague of mine. And I got the most fantastic text Twitter message from Mal, and it said, "You waited until page 169 of book 5 to tell me he's a Geordie." And I thought, do you know what? I realised he's always been a Geordie in my head because he's based on my old workmate. And I just never actually put it on the page. And poor old Malk comes across this having already recorded 4 books previously. So the fun of that was he's now been retrofitted slightly in that I've gone back. And what we said is that he comes from the northeast. He's a Geordie. But he's lived in the east of England so long that he's pretty much lost his accent, unless he's had a few pints of Nuki Brown Ale or he's watching Newcastle United play. And that's now in every book. So yes,
yeah. Have to be retconned.
I've saved that Twitter message for posterity. It will actually be on a blog I'm doing in 2 or 3 weeks. I've actually quoted it verbatim because it's great.
And this is something. Whenever you go to how to be an audiobook narrator thing, they always say, if you got a book, always read it through, the whole thing, before you start recording. And lots of people seem to have this nightmare that they have, like in the last chapter of a 500-page book, which they decided they were in a bit of a rush and they had to get it done, and so they decided to record it without doing a pre-read. And they find out that the main character, who's been on practically every page, has a strong Russian accent, and they find out in the last chapter.
Yeah, I think reading 5 books, especially given that book 5 wasn't available when you sort of started recording, it was probably a bit of an ask. So yeah, that's 100% on me.
My conscience is clear on this.
Anybody listening out there writing a book, make sure you tell the readers where your character comes from, because your audio narrator will appreciate it.
It's been quite a surreal experience for me, because I read the first one and then I read the last one, so I've missed 4 books in the middle. What was it like recording 4 books at once, Mark? It must have been a bit of a challenge.
That was hectic. Yes, that was 2 years ago, and I'd actually got a holiday booked, family holiday. We were going to Scotland on the Caledonian Canal for a week, and got approached, and I think your publisher's HarperCollins, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, and they're pretty big publisher, so they like things done when and where they want them to be done. And it was quite a big thing that they were going to let me record it in a home studio in any case, because they previously had a absolute edict that they never use home studio narrators, but they liked me. So, but they wanted it done by the 23rd of August. That doesn't leave me much time when I've got a holiday booked. And it's like, can we push this back a little bit? And they said, oh, okay, well, we managed to make it the 28th of August. Okay, 28th is better. I can do it by the 28th. And no, but that's the final delivery deadline. So your narration's still got to be due on the 23rd. So yeah, basically I was recording. I was doing the pre-reading while I was on a canal in Scotland. And I recorded 1 book before I left, and then the rest of the summer I was just in my studio from from early till late, including on my birthday. So when lockdown's over, you owe me a drink for that.
One day we will actually meet.
But yeah, it's it all got done on time, and everyone was happy, and I've done 2 since, so that's worked quite nicely.
Yeah, it's a pretty big universe though, Paul. How many actual placements have you got in the universe now? It must be over 50, I would say.
Well, I mean, I have his core team, which I think is the one that, is there most books. And the core team changes a little bit from book to book as people move in and out. But you've got, D.C.I. Jones, Warren Jones, and then you've got his right-hand man, D.I. Sutton. And then there's a couple of detective sergeants. So there's the aforementioned D.S. Hutchinson from Newcastle, and there's D.S. Richardson, who is their specialist. She's ex-traffic, so she's their specialist in things like video and stuff, and then I have a couple of constables as well, but I do have a slightly wider cast. So, for example, the assistant chief constable Nazim Khan is in most books. Warren. I use him as a way of solving a problem, which is that it's impossible to keep a book pacey if you try and wrap up every single end in the final denouement. And Agatha Christie got around it by having Poirot call everyone into the library, and then he would say who did it. And unfortunately, I can't do that every book. So I came up with the idea on the first book that Nazim Khan would be looking to write his memoirs when he finally leaves the police. And so when there's an interesting case, he pulls him in and has a chat with them about it. So there's my little way of doing Agatha Christie's getting everyone in the parlour, and it allows me to type the loose ends. So he's become quite key, and he does actually appear as a main character as well in a couple of books. The Common Enemy, which is about far right activists. They're basically marching on Middlesbrough because Middlesbrough is going to be opening a so-called super mosque and they don't like this, and it becomes very political, as you can imagine, especially when the head of the British Alliance Party is stabbed to death in a alleyway, and that's the main investigation. So Nazim Khan, the Muslim, obviously, assistant chief constable of the police, he's under a lot of pressure himself, so he becomes a character in that book. So yeah, so there's extra characters. Andy Harrison, every single book, he's my crime scene manager. He's in every book, and I know there's a couple of others as a tech support guy. So yeah, the cast has grown over the years, and there's a few who are try and get in at least a little bit in each book because I like them. I like writing them. Each of those characters is separate. Each of them is different to write, and it's nice to have them come in. Seen your mates for a while. I haven't seen them for a while. Bring them in.
I did notice the big change in the universe between the first and the last one.
No, there was a big change, yes, which we can't give away, but yes.
There will be a lot of technical information, the forensic stuff. Do you find that easy to research when you're doing the narration, Malk? Because you do other books too. Do you do research to make sure you get the right technical terms?
In terms of pronunciation, I don't have to understand all the technical details that are going on as long as I sound like I do, or as long as it sounds like the characters do. But yes, when it comes to pronunciations, again, this is part of the pre-reading. You mark any words that you're not familiar with, and they could be technical scientific terms, and you look those up. Where the ones more likely to catch you out, because if you see something really obscure, it's fairly obvious you have to look that up, and usually you can find it. There's a few places we look, starting with the Oxford Dictionary and then moving on from there, depending on more obscure ones. The ones that are likely to trip you up are words that you've read and seen on the printed page your entire life, but never actually heard anyone else say out loud. So you have your way in your head of pronouncing it. I mean, imagine if you'd never heard anyone say the word yacht, or at least read it out when you were aware that how that's spelled. You'd say yashed or yacked or something like that. Yeah. And it's things like that tend to catch you out, that hopefully your proofer will catch.
Yeah. When you're working with proof people, Paul, that must be a different technical thing, but you've also got to talk to Malk about the book. What were those phone calls like? Because of course it must have been a bit strange.
Yeah, I mean we have had a couple of conversations, haven't we? The first time round, you see, I hadn't realised they were going to audiobook. When I wrote them in about 2011. They were published in 2014. It was summer 20. I want to say 18 or 17, and we actually got the first audiobook. I never thought it would happen. So when my editor said, "Oh, I've been chatting to your audio narrator," he says, "Do you want to have a chat with him?" I said, "Yes, please." And yeah, you had a sort of list of things that you wanted me to ask. They wanted to ask me about. From then on, it's quite often we actually do it via Twitter direct message, don't we? Which is great. And one of the great things about Malk, and I guess audio readers in general, is they're very good proofreaders as well. Because when you read it out loud, you do hear things which your eye just skips over. And I really, it's one of those things I really need to get into the habit of either reading out loud or getting the computer to read out loud, which is what some of my friends do. To see if I can pick up some of those errors before they make it as far as the proofreaders or even Malk. So that's that's quite good, and I think it's nice to have that little bit of dialogue if there's anything there. Although quite often it is along the case of how do you pronounce this name? No idea. I've never seen it. I leave that to Malk's wisdom to go and look that up. I just thought, can I just jump in quickly as well? Because we've had a question popped up here, and I wanted to hear your opinion on this. There's a user here who says that she's just about to buy the book, and can she read it as a standalone? Now, obviously, I personally think you can, but obviously, I'm very close to it. What's your opinion, guys? Particularly, I think Alex, having read only 2 of the books with a gap between them.
I would say that the gap I had was too long.
Yeah.
I would say that if you're going to do it, read them in blocks, maybe 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do what I did and skip 1 to 6.
Yeah.
I think you probably could start in the middle of a series. I mean, each book does stand up in its own right, but you would be aware that you're missing backstory. I mean, you do usually fill things in a little bit, whenever. I'm gonna struggle with names as Sutton or the DSI Grayson.
Yeah.
DSI Grayson. There's usually whenever they're introduced in one of the books, there's a little recap of any controversy in the relationship that has happened. But I think they would stand up on their own. But you'd certainly be better off reading them in order. There's something that happens at the end of Common Enemy, which I think does. That would make it more difficult to come to the books after that, being unaware of that.
Yeah, it's a big shift in the series, and I think whilst I'm sure, having read the later ones, you go back and say, right, okay, and it would kind of give you some of that. I think, my personal feeling is you should try and read before. I don't know what the pricing deals are on audiobook. I'll be honest, but a price to pay at the moment is 99 pence on Kindle. And we've just done the last straw, which is the first in the series, is also 99 pence. So the earlier ones are cheaper. Plugging way ahead till February, because I've just got confirmation. The first 5 books, so that's going to be the first 3 full lengths. That's the last straw, No Smoke Without Fire, and Science is the Grave, are going to be bundled with the first 2 novellas. And that's going to be in an omnibus at $3.99. Now, as far as I'm aware, that's just a Kindle thing. I don't think they're going to be, unless Audible were to bundle the first 3 full-length novels together as some sort of deal. I don't know. I can't speak to that. Unfortunately, as Malcolm sure will say, is he hasn't recorded the novellas, so you wouldn't get the full omnibus on Audible, which is a shame.
I think there is. I don't know whether it works when the print copy is being discounted, but I think there is a thing that Audible do that if you buy the print version of a book and possibly the Kindle version from Amazon, you can just pay a couple of quid extra and you get access to the audiobook.
Yes, that might work that way.
I don't know whether that will work when you're selling the book for 95 pence. It may or may not. I'm not sure.
No idea. No.
I noticed there's a couple of questions in the comments that have been aimed at me. Do you mind if I answer those?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay. Caroline Mastons asked a couple. How would someone approach me to record an audiobook? Well, you can look at my website, which is Malk with a K, williams.co.uk. So malkwilliams.co.uk. There are contact details on there. I am open to being approached. If you, as a writer, are on ACX, that's Audible's Audiobook Creation Exchange, I can be found as a narrator and contacted on there as well. So I'm not difficult to find because there's not very many Malks or Malk Williamses, especially who do audiobooks out there. So
good branding.
Yes, I do voiceovers for other things as well. I'd say my bread and butter is definitely audiobooks. I was a storyteller, just an amateur part-time storyteller before I got into voice acting. And audiobooks were always where I knew I would end up. But I also do standard corporate stuff, e-learning, and computer games. I like doing video games. They are fun, and they pay a lot more than audiobooks as well, unless you have to try. What else? Have I a preference for the genre I record? Not a single preference. There are certain things, mostly if you get with a new casting director, they'll ask you your preferred genres, and also if you'll do non-fiction as well as fiction. Yeah, there are things I like doing. I like doing science fiction and fantasy. Strangely, detective fiction is not one that I would have listed as a particular favorite of mine. But obviously, practically every casting director I have clearly thinks I'm suited for it, because I get, I've had the 6 of yours. Obviously, I've had a couple of
I think you've got 24
three that are set in Sherlock Holmes's London, the Arrowwood series. Had a couple set in Budapest, a couple set in India. So I get quite a lot of detective fiction, but I like historical fiction.
Who's the detective set in India?
Let me see.
So Abir Mukherjee, is it?
Abir Mukherjee, yeah. Now,
sweet. I'm a good friend of Abir. I had no idea we had the same narrator.
No, it's odd. I've only done 2 of his, and they're only available in America. I don't think you can buy them in the UK. There was some licensing thing. There was someone else has recorded them in the UK, and then they got me to record the first 2 in America. I hope they asked me to do the others, because I love his books. They are.
Oh yeah, let's plug them. Let's plug them. Abir Mukherjee, folks, very, very good writer, set in Calcutta around about more or less around about. It's a bit before partition, isn't it?
It's the 1920s.
Yeah, I think he's working towards partition, but absolutely excellent.
Yes.
Right, he owes me a pint now. Yeah.
I had him on as my first weekly person.
Oh, did
you? I had a wonderful phone conversation with him, because of course there's in the first book, there's loads of Indian names and Indian terms, and places in Calcutta and the and environs of Calcutta, but also loads of Scottish names and quite obscure Scottish things. And he's called Abir Mukherjee, and he's writing a book about being in India. And I'd seen a picture of him, and he looks like someone who would be called Abir Mukherjee. And I had this great big list of questions. I would rather he answer them than have to look each one up individually. And eventually he phones me, and he said, "Hey Malk, it's Abir Mukherjee." Oh right,
you sound exactly
like I thought you would. Oh, is that right? Yeah, I live in Scotland. My dad was from Calcutta. So yeah, it was a fantastic conversation. But
it's good bloke. Oh, I do not keep a marmalade sandwich under my hat, which is one of the questions that has popped up. What I have been keeping under my hat is lockdown hair, which was absolutely horrendous until on Saturday I took my life and my ears and put them in Cheryl's hands, my partner. She had a pair of scissors and a pair of clippers, and although my hat has made it a bit untidy, that is an awful lot better than it was. However, the hat is, I like to think it's part of my branding, which is why I keep
it is. I've never seen you without one.
No, I always wear it. I don't know why. I started wearing it a few years back, and then it just became that. I haven't got one now because I'm wearing tracksuit bottoms, but I also wear braces. So brace and hat. You always know who it is when you see me at a literary festival. But yes, she did a good job of it. I'm quite impressed.
Yeah. Now that Cheryl's at the mention, could you tell the audience why Malk hasn't recorded everything in the audiobook?
Oh yes, yeah. So you don't tend to do the acknowledgements so much, do you? Do you?
Not generally. Only if specifically asked to. Usually, it is acknowledged that the acknowledgements don't make it in. But
no, that's fine. Yeah. Which, to be fair, if this is just as well, really, because it kind of would have potentially given it away. I chose in the common enemy to propose in the acknowledgements. So the first letter of every single line in the acknowledgements reads, "Will you marry me?" Which was quite hard going, because it's not a particularly attractive piece of prose, it has to be said, if you're trying to get sentences starting with specific letters. And I told my editor about 3 times, make sure nobody edits the acknowledgements. She's like, okay. Next time I saw her, just make sure when you're doing the edits, just nobody changes then. She must have thought I was mad. And when I eventually took Cheryl away and I got her to read the acknowledgements, a letter at a time. I told it was that Facebook game I'd seen where you tried to see if there's anything rude spelt out in your acknowledgements. And of course, the first five letters are Will you marry me? Are Willie, which we thought was quite amusing. And then we got almost to the end before Cheryl suddenly dawned what I was spelling on a piece of paper. So once we sort of announced this, my editor was like, "That is why you were so weird about people editing your acknowledgements, because it's a little bit clunky, it has to be said. And anybody who's editing might say, do you know what? If we just switch those two sentences round, it'll read a lot better." So big sigh of relief. And when it came out in the Kindle about June, and I decided I was going to propose to I think it was September, because I was waiting for the paperback to come out. So I had these several months where I'm just thinking, please let nobody say, "Oh, I've just seen the message you wrote in the acknowledgements" publicly on Facebook and ruin the surprise. But it didn't happen, fortunately. Oh, the next book, the novella says She Said Yes. That was even harder to get into the acknowledgements.
That is one unique way to do it. I think you told us about it during the garden at Theakston's. It's
yes,
yeah, it's a pretty cool place at Theakston's. You were involved in a short story collection called Dark Minds, which was on audio. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Dark Minds was a charity anthology done by Betsy Reevely at Bloodhound Books a few years back. And it was, she just asked a lot of people, would you mind contributing a short story? And I had this short story. If I get the book, I think we tidied it. I've tidied, I think, oh, no, I've got it. I knew I had it here somewhere. Right, okay. So this is Dark Minds. So I had a short story I'd written some years ago, and I always liked it, but it wasn't in a good, it wasn't ready to be published. But when she said, would you like to contribute a story? It was a case of, yes, I would definitely go, and it gives you an opportunity to go back. So the story is not a D.C. Warren Jones story. It's a completely standalone. It's a thriller called A Stranger's Eyes, and it's all about a bloke who basically wakes up in a hotel room with no memory of what's happened the night before, but there's blood on the side of his head, and he keeps on blacking out because he's obviously got some sort of head injury. And when he does, he gets these flashbacks of something very unpleasant happening the night before. So it's a story that's told in two directions. You've got the main direction, which is him working out what the nerves going on, and then the flashbacks go backwards in time as you work out how he actually got into his predicament. And it raised money for Hospice UK and Sophie's Appeal, which is for a sort of research and treatment. And it's great. There's some fantastic authors in it. It really is, and I was very, very proud to be in here. You've got people like Emma Puller, you've got LJ Ross. We've got who else? We've got in a couple of us. I'm just jumping out here. Lucy Hay and Alex Hawley. This superb book. So it's still available. It's available on all three formats. So you've got paperback, Kindle, and audiobook as well. If you go to my Amazon page, there's a link from there, easy enough, or my website, paulgitcham.com, under other writing. And I highly recommend. Good causes and some excellent stories in it.
Yeah, Malk, when reading the things before doing the book, do you manage to solve it as you're reading, or do you not? What do you focus on?
Sometimes, not completely reliably. There have been times when Paul has set a trap for readers, as happened in a Price to Pay. Actually, I thought for quite a while it was the person I was being led to. You've got the person that everyone in the book is assuming that it's going to be, and you see, but as a reader, you see clues leading it. Oh no, it may be somewhere else. And so I went for that, and I went for the wrong one, and I did realize before the reveal that actually no, it was someone else, but But yeah, I do try to, but I don't always manage it.
Yeah. The reason I say that is because Mark Billingham told me that one of his books he had to change the accent of the killer for the audio book because it would give it away.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I did have that in mind.
Mm.
Yeah.
I did have that in mind.
That is quite a significant thing. That there was one book that I did, really weird one. It wasn't a murder mystery or anything. It was a pastiche of a sort of fanfic cross between Scooby-Doo and the Famous Five. It was called Meddling Kids. It was really, really weird. It was great fun. But the characters in it were fundamentally pastiches of the Scooby Gang, with the exception of one of them. There was a girl who was basically a mixture of Velma, Daphne, and George from the Famous Five. So, but there were a few things in that where the accent would have given it away. So the author specifically asked me to, really give most of the characters a very, very similar accent and tone so that it wouldn't be obvious from the voice. But when someone's described as having a strong accent, unless one trick you can do, because it's sometimes like a voice in a darkened room when the protagonist turns round or the victim turns round just before they die, and you can just sort of really come in on the mic and just whisper, that sort of thing. So the accent isn't quite as pronounced. So you can try and help out with things like that. Because obviously we are aware that this is something that's going to happen. We're, very acutely aware of the issues with audio.
But now you see, we actually do think about that as well.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting thing. I've learned a few things not to do or to do differently because I think it'd be better with the audio. Not putting a table of data in a book is a good one. The last straw. It's just the easiest way. A list of mobile telephone numbers. I didn't actually put numbers in, obviously, but I put a list of mobiles and who they were contacting and stuff. And being a scientist, the easiest thing to do was just stick it on the table. Kindle's fine with that. Print's lovely on the paperback, not a problem. But I always remember our first ever conversation, which was now the table. And I just had this. I hadn't even thought about it for about 7 years. It's like, oh dear God, never crossed my mind. But he did it very well. That's the thing. That's we discussed how's the best way to do it and did it. But looking back on that, it was like, it's just little things just to not to do in future. But so it's a learning curve.
I do quite a few non-fiction books as well, and some of them you obviously get tabular data. So it wasn't the first time I'd done it. They're not too much of a problem. The problem is where you sometimes get a graph, a bar chart or a graph or something, and then it's the text afterwards refers to it, and so you can't just completely omit it. And there have been books where I have actually had to come up with a description of a line graph, so with 3 lines on it. There was one I did a few months ago about global warming, and that there were quite a few graphs in that I actually had to describe. I have no idea whether people actually listening to the audio book get anything from that. I mean, I do it to the best of my ability. I used to be a technical writer, so I'm actually quite good at those sorts of technical descriptions. But even so, whether someone who's driving along, listening to an audiobook, hearing me describe the angle of climb of this line relative to the X and Y axis, and sharply veering upwards to a peak, whether that comes across, I've no idea.
It's tricky, isn't it? Yeah.
It's always been a bit difficult because I first came across that problem when I was reading Jeffrey Deaver, because he used to end the openings of the earlier books with a whiteboard of what the clues were.
Oh yes.
It's rather, yeah.
You ever read Tom Clancy? He has maps.
Oh my God, that'd be a nightmare, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you should do a couple of Tom Clancy's, Malk. It'll take you about 12 months to read each one because they're so thick. But yeah, do the maps and the lists of Russian names and stuff at the beginning.
There does come a point, if it's clearly impossible, when sometimes a publisher will agree to have a PDF of any graphs, diagrams, or maps. If they really can't be omitted, if it spoils the book not to have access to them, and they clearly can't be described, then you can have a wad of PDFs that can be downloaded, and they'll put a link either in the audiobook or on the cover.
Yeah, yeah.
But they hate doing that. They really hate it.
No.
When constructing dialogue, Paul, because of the way you do things, I mean, I noticed that there's not as much general dialogue conversation because you do it from the point of view of the detective's mind on a lot of it, because it does it in overview. Why did you decide to do that? Because you're the first person to do it, really.
Just felt natural the way to write it. So basically, what Alex is sort of describing is for those who've not read the series, is that I write third person point of view. So I'm writing about. So it's not I did this first person or you did this, which is second person. It's Warren did this. So that's how I write it. But I'm quite happy about talking about what he's thinking. So you get his thoughts as well, and I don't tend to do them as dialogue. So you can have people who actually write almost as dialogue, the inner monologue of the person. It tends to be Warren thought this, followed by the description. So my books are third person, and they're what I referred to, and it's entirely my own term, as sitting on your shoulder third person. In that, it's not omniscient for most of it. So omniscient is where basically you're like a god looking down, and you're saying he's doing this, she's doing that, they've just done this. It tends to mostly be, it's almost like you're running behind Warren's shoulder, saying Warren did this, Warren did this, Warren did this. Now, I do occasionally jump to other characters. I do like to have a nice chapter where we follow another one of the characters, and that's good fun. But it'd be pretty much the same writing style usually for that as well. So we go and follow Moray for a bit, or we go and follow Karen Hardwick. So that's another thing. But it's still the same sort of dialogue, but same sort of way of writing this. But it's just what's natural. I mean, that's how I wrote. I mean, funnily enough, for short stories, if I'm knocking one out, I often do that first person, completely different style when I'm writing my novels. So.
It's a really good way of summarising a lot of information, especially when you've got a room full of about 10 or 15 people, and it works.
That is tricky, actually, when you've got a room of so many people, because what we forget sometimes is that, unlike television, where you look into the room and you can see all the characters are on screen, with a novel, you've got to ask people to remember who you said was in that room. And I'm hoping it's something I'm getting better at over the years. As you practice, it's like anything, you do this. And funny enough, I've got some blog posts coming up, and some of them more recently on things like character voice. And I just did someone naming characters. And there are elements of those blog posts that touch on the idea that you've got to introduce people correctly, but you've also got to remind the reader who they are, which is why you have to give them a separate voice, so that it's clear who's talking. Otherwise, you have to end up peppering your text with he said, John said, Bob said, Karen said, and that can get a little bit tedious for the reader. So ideally, if you want to be able to do 2 or 3 sentences without having to say specifically said by this person. So if you have a distinct voice for them, it can help that, and it keeps the flow going. But that's, it's practice. It's just, hopefully, this book will be better than the last one, and the one I write next will be better than the last one. That's how it works.
I've noticed.
Can I just cut in there? There's one particular, on that exact subject, one particular nightmare I had. This was in my first year as a full-time audiobook narrator. And it was a book called Rough Diamond, which was based around a real character called Tony Barnatu, who was involved in the diamond and gold industry in South Africa in the 19th century, became, fabulously rich. And I won't go too much into the plot of it, but the main thing is it was set in South Africa. Initially in the part of it where diamonds are most mined, and then it goes towards what we identify with South Africa, the country, rather than just the southern part of the continent of Africa. And they spend quite a lot of time in Johannesburg. And at the time, the president of the Transvaal, which was what it was called back then, was Paulus Johannes Kruger, who hated the English and generally spoke Afrikaans whenever he could. And there were two particular scenes in this which were an absolute nightmare for me. One, he gave a speech in Johannesburg to mostly English-speaking people in Afrikaans. And I get a paragraph on the page like this of Paul Kruger speaking in Afrikaans. So I had to get someone to record it who spoke Afrikaans, so I could then just sort of parrot that. But the thing that I was getting to, there was a scene in it. Although he was the president, he was quite informal. His whole government was quite informal, and he was ill, and he's ill in bed, and he hosts his cabinet in his bedroom, and you have about 8 or 9 middle-aged South African men who are having a conversation, all cutting across each other, and it doesn't always say he said, she said, and I only have one South African accent. If you have, if it was in this country, it could be nuanced. I could have someone with a terribly plummy, posh accent, and you might have a John Prescott character from the north who was also in the cabinet. I know the regional accents here, but in South Africa, I've only got like South Africa, and they're all middle-aged as well. So exactly how I could differentiate these voices. I'm just having to sort of contort my face into weird shapes. I think I managed it, but that's another of the ones I've done it's only available in the States, so it's not easy to get hold of. But yeah, that was hard work. But that's the audiobook narrator's side of that particular dichotomy.
That's rather ironic, because I was just about to ask you that before. Yeah. So you read my mind as well. Yeah.
Caroline's just asking about practice, actually. Do you have to practice doing the different accents? And which ones do you enjoy? Which is your favourite?
Okay. I do have favourites, definitely. I mean, I grew up in Whitby, which I'm on the coast of Yorkshire, which I've got about 5 or 6 different Yorkshire accents that I do, and I'm very fond of all of them. Most people, when they do a Yorkshire accent, they'll just do a very bad Geoffrey Boycott. Hey, my granny could have caught that in a penny. But I always like a Scottish accent. It's quite fond of that. One of my party tricks is to recite Burns' poetry. We sleek at cowering timorous beastie. Oh, what a panic's in thy breastie. But there are some that I do practice, and there are some that I find that I have to do that I might not be really familiar with. I have done a couple of Scandinois, and my Swedish accent's dreadful. It won't. I can do it for about a line and a half, and then I lose it. And I've always got like a little audio file which I will just keep playing, and usually I've got a particular word or a phrase like to get into a particular accent, for a Southern Irish accent. Usually there was a line from a travelogue that I read with someone who was in an Irish pub claiming that they were Irish, and the barman goes, "Sound English to me, sir." So whenever I go into an Irish accent, I start by saying, "Sound English to me, sir." And there's the fairly standard ones. I live in Wales these days, but to get into a Welsh accent, it's usually one of the stereotypical things. Whose coat is this jacket then, eh? But these days, I live in South Wales, so I actually had just before we moved here, the solicitor who dealt with our conveyancing had a wonderful voice. He sounded a bit like Rob Brydon, and I'd sometimes phone him. And whenever I phoned him, he'd never be there. And his secretary would say he was in court, and he'll phone you back this afternoon. And 2 days later, I'd have a phone call, and I'd pick up the phone, and there'd be no one there. And then after about 5 seconds, there'd be this noise here. Oh, Mr. Williams, I am so sorry I missed your call the other day. I had to take my boy to the rugby, you see, and I could just listen to him talking all day long. He had a wonderful voice.
It's funny because one of the readers has just said, how Scottish accent varies a lot like English ones do.
Absolutely. I do a few different Scottish accents. This is.
I like. I could listen to Val McDermott read a telephone directory, partly because I think she's incredibly intelligent. Anything that she's got to say, even if I don't agree with it, it's worth listening to. But also, I just really like her accent. I think it's very, very pleasing to listen to.
When I was choosing Warren's accents, actually, it was quite interesting because, of course, he's from Coventry, and there's always quite a bit of banter between Warren and the people in Middlesbrough, who are variously have estuary accents and Essex accents and London accents, and they all think he talks like a Brummie, which really offends him. So I had to include. Coventry's a fairly neutral kind of accent. It's not very strong.
It's got two accents.
To include a bit of Brummie in his voice, probably more so than a Coventry accent would have, so that other people listening to it would recognise that he does have a bit of Brummie. They can see why people are making fun of him. And then there was in one of the books, I forget which one might have been The Common Enemy. There was a detective who was originally a Scouser.
Yes, that's right.
And right at the end, he's having a go at Warren. He's taking the mick out of the way that he's run the investigation, or how sanctimonious he is, or something. I forget exactly what it was, but he then sort of does an impression of Warren saying something, and so I just did that in a really caricatured Brummie accent because it just seemed like the thing that character would do at the time.
The Coventry accent is a bit of a funny one. So we had this conversation because I remember you saying you've been looking to try and find it, and the thing is, when I went to university, so I went first of all to Bath University down south, and at the time, I would have had a fairly strong Coventry accent, I suppose, although my parents aren't from there. So, but, I did have it. And they used to call me a dirty northerner. And I was like, I'm from the Midlands. Okay. Then when I moved up to Manchester to go to university, I was a southern softie. And I'm like, I am from the Midlands. But I never really heard this thing. People would call me a Brummie and stuff at uni, which is where all that's come from. Just the fun of being from Coventry, you get called a Brummie and everything.
Yeah.
And obviously I never heard that. I couldn't know what they're talking about. And then after, I must have been away for about 10 or 11 years by this point. And I came back to Coventry and was working before I went off to teach training. And we had I met my new team, and they said, "Oh, introduce yourselves," and they went round the table, and I thought everybody must be from Solihull or Birmingham. Every single one of them was from Coventry, and I thought, "Oh my God, that must be what I sounded like when I got to university." People from that. I've been away for so long, living, obviously down in Bath, and then living up in the northwest, that my accent had faded, and I wasn't used to hearing it. But I was like, "Oh my God, there was definitely a bit of a Birmingham twang to it."
Yeah, I
we
went
delete
to
that?
college for 4 years in Coventry. So when you were talking about cobs and barn cakes and all that,
Yeah.
and batchers is the strangest thing you could think of, really.
Yeah. The first time I went to a chip shop in Bath, and I noticed it's Bath, not Bath. I went to it in Bath, and we go to the pub, go to the chip shop. Can I have a chip batch, please? And the bloke just looked at me. I was like, "Wait a what? A chip batch?" And I pointed to the bread rolls on the counter. I said, "What are those with chips in?" Oh, with a bread roll. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you chip shops where you are do scraps?
Do you know? I don't know. We when I was in Coventry, we had a couple of chip shops close to us, and they were very, very good ones. Now, I never saw scraps there, but they were very inventive. They, anything that was coming up, deep fried Mars bars. I don't know if anyone ever bought one from there, but he had them. But
no, it's growing
scraps,
up in Yorkshire.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yes,
Do you know, Alex?
scraps,
You might have
it's
been.
just the little bits of batter that are left over. And
Yeah,
in Yorkshire, they just they'll collect these, and they don't charge you anything for it. You just say, fish chips and scraps, and they scatter these batter scraps on top of it. And I've not encountered, certainly not in either when I lived in the home counties or in Wales. If you go in and the first time you do, you say, fish chips and scraps, because that's what you do. And they, what do you mean, scraps? And they're completely uncomprehending. And then you explain to them what it is, and they look at you as if you're some kind of deviant.
Well, you do know that Marks and Spencer's are now selling them.
It's nice though. It makes your chips crunchier.
Yeah, I'd eat it. Yeah, Marks and Spencer's have just started selling them. So Marks and Spencer scraps are at £1 for a box. And there was something of a furore on Facebook when this was announced. People saying, "I'm not paying for that," and others going, "Why on earth would you eat that?"
Well, that's regional for you, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, mushy peas. A lot of people don't get mushy peas at chip shop, or Manchester caviar, as my brother-in-law calls it, which I think is a brilliant phrase.
What would you say is the most unusual phrase you've ever had to use in an audiobook now? It's not
most unusual phrase. God, I honestly don't know. No, there's going to be nothing comes to mind on that.
Yeah, about 2 minutes past 8, you'll think of one. It's just as we log off, I'm sure.
Quite possibly, yes. L'esprit d'escalier. But
yeah. What about when you're researching stuff, Paul, and you're looking for an unusual plot? What would you say is the most unusual one you decided to do or decided to look for?
What, looking for plots?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a long file which I just add to, and they're usually normally on one line. And I don't know whether I'll ever use them. But did occur to me one day whilst watching true crime documentary, and I don't know where this came from, it just sprung to mind. What would happen if local drug dealers put drugs in their little dog shit bags? I think it's because they had a habit of hanging them from trees in some of these places. And I thought, yeah, I suppose they could do. You could put your drugs in there. The smell, the sniffer dog comes along and you just think it's having a sniff under the dog's poo. That's what dogs do. I don't know whether I'd ever use that in a book. I would imagine if you're in a desperate enough state already to be doing that sort of thing, you probably aren't. Probably just give it a rinse off under the tap and you'd be happy to inject it. But yeah, I thought that was a weird one. Maybe one day it'll appear in a book somewhere.
I've thought of something weird that I had to. I won't be able to remember the exact phrase because it was in German. It was in a book set during the First World War in German East Africa, which is now Tanzania, and there was I think she was a Nigerian princess or East African princess, something like that. So she generally had quite an African accent, sort of. I think it was quite a Nigerian accent, but she spoke fluent German well enough to be a native, and proved this by doing a tongue twister in German. So I had a German tongue twister spoken by an African princess.
Oh. Oh,
wasn't
just
too bad.
mean.
I do speak a little bit of German, not very much, but it was good enough for that.
Oh dear.
Complicated.
I don't feel
There was
quite so guilty now. When I put something in, I thought, oh, well, Malk will have find that tricky. There.
There was another thing from that particular book, which I was reminded of by the Hutchinson Geordie thing. There was a character who I discovered after I'd read the book and I was researching it, because I didn't even know there was a German East Africa campaign in World War One. It's not something we're ever taught. We're only taught about the trenches and the Western Front. But there was a character, name escapes me now. But the first scene where this character encounters some of the protagonists, one of them shouts a warning that this guy's there and says, "Look out for the Geordie." And I thought, he's a Geordie. Therefore, he had a Geordie accent the entire book. Now, I worked out by myself afterwards that actually, when I looked him up, I thought he doesn't look like a Geordie. And he, looking at his bio on Wikipedia, no, he's from London and he went to Harrow or Eton or somewhere like that. He's probably got a really plummy voice. And it occurred to me that the reason Geordies are called Geordies was because, or at least this is one theory, I think it's something like King George's Own Fusiliers or something. There was a regiment which had King George in it, which was based in Newcastle. And that's how they got the name. Geordies were George's boys. That's a theory. If there's any Geordies out there who are going to take issue with that, fine. It may not be quite right. But in this case, I think what was meant by look out for the Geordie was he is one of King George's men.
Yeah.
But I only worked that out afterwards. And so this guy has a Geordie accent through the whole book.
My great-grandfather is from County Durham, and he was known as Scottish Tommy. And for years, there was some confusion there. We did wonder whether that, because the family tree for our family, that side of the family is very, very sparse, very poor. We did wonder whether there was some Scottish blood in there, but it wasn't. It was because he was up in County Durham, but he ended up in the Scots, one of the Scots regiments, because it's obviously relatively close to the border, and he was working a bit further north, and so that's why he was known as Scottish Tommy. So he was nothing to do with his ancestry. He was Durham born and bred.
Right.
Yeah. As we've got 5 minutes left, is there any audience questions in the side that we haven't covered yet?
I think there's one here about potential standalones, and then there's one for Malk for video games. So if you ever think about video games, and I'll take the one on
video games
standalones.
Yeah, I've not as many as I'd like to. I've done. I don't know if any of you are familiar with a series of books called Redwall. They're sort of children's fantasy books where all the protagonists are small furry animals, mice and rabbits and things. There's a few of those that I've done different voices in, including one which is a sort of update of a very old style adventure game. The text adventure games that used to get in the 80s and 90s. And it's one of those, except that as well as having the text, the whole thing is narrated, and I narrated the whole thing. And also, if you've got an Amazon Alexa, then whatever it's called with Alexa on it, then you can do the whole thing as a sort of interactive radio play. So you can speak the instructions, and then you'll have my voice doing that. That's called Escape the Gloomer. If you look on YouTube for Escape the Gloomer trailer, there is a trailer which I also narrate of that. But the one that and there's a few other Redwall games as well. I think the Scout is one. It's certainly available on Steam, possibly other platforms. The one I'm most pleased with, and it was meant to be released this spring. I'm not sure whether they'll have changed that because of COVID or anything. But it's called Harold Halibut. And again, look up Harold Halibut on YouTube or the website. and look at the videos of it. If the game's available, I'd love to actually play it, because all the animation in it is like old-fashioned stop motion animation. It's all, they made all the models, all the backgrounds, all the characters, all the sets, and everything is actually made up like an old-fashioned stop motion thing. It is the most beautiful look for a game. It's completely unlike anything else. So yeah, I've got a fairly main character in Harold Halibut. So go and look that one up.
Right, very quickly, I'll just take the one about the standalone. I do have I've been working on a standalone. I wrote quite a lot of it last summer, with a plan of coming back to it this summer and finishing it off, because DCI Warren Jones is obviously my big contracted series. It was going to be set partly in the summer of 2020. So that's been put to one side for a little while. We'll see how this whole situation sorts itself out. So yeah, there are plans for standalones, but they are currently on the shelf, which is fine because it means it gives me more time to write Warren Jones. So next summer's books with my editor, and I'm 65,000 words into the next summer 2022 book. So yeah. Standalones, perhaps watch this space in a couple of years' time.
And there's a final question for you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Given that you end the books with the talk with the Chief Constable, are you going to do a book about the Chief Constable and how he? Yeah.
Do you know what? I never ever thought of that. No plans, but now you put an idea in my head. Maybe a short story, The Adventures of ACC Nazim Khan. Yeah, maybe I should do that. Yeah,
yeah. I think that would really work, because it's kind of, because as you say, you're telling it from his angle, and you keep saying, "Oh, these are from his memoirs," on both books that I've read so far. So I think that would really work. Yeah.
Maybe I should do. Yeah, maybe I'll do a spin-off book, The Memoirs of ACC Nazim Khan, as he takes credit for everybody else's cases.
You do occasionally mention that he had a reputation for being quite reckless in his youth. So
yeah, maybe I could look at that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there you go. That might be your standalone for you right there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I'll have him retire before 2020.
Yeah,
solve that problem immediately.
as that's 8 o'clock, I think that's perfect to end on.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
great,
both
fantastic
of you,
to have the chat,
great.
Gentlemen.
Yeah,
thank you very much for everyone tuning in.
No problem, and hopefully you guys will be able to see us next week when I talk to the Blood Brothers podcast.